Emma had always loved the quiet rhythm of Saturday mornings at the farmer's market. The sun filtered gently through the tall trees lining the stalls, casting golden light over rows of fresh vegetables, homemade bread, and fragrant flowers. It was the one place where she could feel alive, where her mind could escape the tiny apartment she had returned to after the divorce. She enjoyed the simple things, now the crunch of apples under her fingers, the warm smell of fresh bread, the chatter of people hunting for their weekly produce, but this morning felt different. There was an edge to the air, a strange tension she couldn't place as she wandered past crates of tomatoes and pumpkins. As she bent to pick up a particularly ripe tomato, a familiar voice stopped her cold. "Emma," she froze. Slowly, she turned her head and her heart jumped in an unexpected way. There, standing a few feet away with a basket of oranges, was Margaret, her ex-mother-in-law. The woman who had once been a constant in her life, a source of both comfort and occasional tension, was now a stranger who somehow felt intimately familiar. Margaret's hair had hints of silver now, but her eyes were the same sharp, knowing, and gentle all at once. Her smile carried a kind of warmth that Emma hadn't realized she had missed until this exact moment. "I didn't expect to see you here," Margaret said softly, almost hesitant. Yet there was a sincerity in her tone that struck Emma deeply. Emma forced a polite smile, the words sticking in her throat. "Margaret, it's been a long time." She realized how little she knew about Margaret's life since the divorce. They had drifted apart, naturally at first, then completely, leaving gaps of years filled with memories that refused to fade. Memories of holiday dinners, whispered advice, and quiet afternoons spent in comfortable conversation. She had always respected Margaret, sometimes feared her, but now, seeing her again, there was a pull she couldn't explain. They started walking together, slowly through the bustling market. Margaret picked up a jar of golden honey and offered it to Emma, her fingers brushing lightly against Emma's hand. "Your taste hasn't changed," she said with a soft chuckle. Emma laughed a little nervously, the sound catching in her throat. It was strange, she thought, how someone could feel both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Stirring emotions she hadn't expected. They walked past stalls of fresh herbs, hand-picked vegetables, and bouquets of wildflowers, exchanging small talk that quickly grew into something deeper. Margaret began to talk about her life, the quiet apartment she had moved into after her son left for work in another city, the evenings that often felt too long, the loneliness that crept in despite friends and neighbors. Emma listened, genuinely engaged, surprised at how easily the words flowed between them. Then Emma shared a little of her own life, the struggles at her new job, the quiet nights in her apartment, the longing she sometimes felt for companionship, for connection, for something that felt like home again. The conversation felt like a bridge, rebuilding a connection she had thought lost forever. At one point, Margaret's voice softened, almost a whisper, as if sharing a secret meant only for Emma. "I've missed having you in my life." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. 'Twas true she had missed Margaret too. Missed the subtle support, the shared understanding, the quiet laughter that had been a comfort in difficult times. But the words carried something more now. There was a hint of longing, an unspoken tension that neither had acknowledged before. Before either of them could explore the feeling, Margaret's phone rang. She excused herself, leaving Emma with a flood of emotions she couldn't yet organize. When Margaret returned, there was a subtle shift in the air, a quiet electricity, as if the universe had nudged them into a space that was theirs alone, but fragile and charged. Emma left the market that morning with her heart racing, her mind swirling. Something had changed. Something had shifted between them in a way she couldn't yet define. Over the next few days, Emma found herself replaying the encounter in her mind. She thought about the gentle touch of Margaret's hand, the softness in her voice, the way her presence filled a room even in silence. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, not yet, but it carried a weight, a significance she couldn't ignore. She caught herself smiling at her phone when she remembered Margaret's laugh, a laugh that felt both familiar and surprising. There was an intensity there that made her question what she thought she knew about her own feelings. The next Saturday, Emma returned to the farmer's market, her heart skipping as she scanned the stalls. She didn't have to look far. Margaret was there again, selecting pumpkins with a careful eye. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Margaret's smile held a hint of something unspoken, a promise of conversation, perhaps even more. Emma walked toward her, each step weighted with anticipation. "Emma," Margaret said again, this time with a lightness in her tone that made Emma's stomach flutter. "I was hoping I'd see you here." They wandered together among the stalls, laughing softly at small things, a curious child tasting berries, a dog sniffing at the edge of a vegetable stand, a vendor calling out his daily specials. The world seemed to fade around them, leaving only the warmth of conversation and the shared history that lingered between them. Margaret picked up a bouquet of wildflowers and handed them to Emma. "For you," she said simply. Emma's fingers brushed against hers as she took the flowers, and for a moment she felt a jolt of something she hadn't felt in years, a deep, unspoken connection. As they walked toward a small cafe at the edge of the market, their conversation deepened. Margaret spoke of dreams she had shelved, plans she had abandoned for practicality, moments of regret and triumph. Emma shared her own quiet victories, her fears, her moments of loneliness, her yearning for something meaningful. The words flowed, easily now, no longer hesitant, each sentence building a bridge between the past and present, between loss and longing. At one point, Margaret's voice softened again. "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if things had been different?" she asked, her eyes searching Emma's face. Emma's heart clenched. "All the time," she admitted. "I try not to, but sometimes, yes." The truth was raw and simple. They had both moved on, yet here they were, drawn together by a force neither could name. They lingered over coffee, the warm aroma filling the small cafe. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street. Emma found herself stealing glances at Margaret, noting the gentle lines around her eyes, the way her lips curved when she smiled, the softness in her voice that seemed to reach inside Emma and touch something vulnerable, yet alive. Margaret's presence was magnetic, familiar, and strangely comforting. Yet it carried an undercurrent of something more attention that neither of them dared name. When it was time to leave, they walked back toward the market. Emma felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. She wanted to prolong the moment, to linger in Margaret's company, but the world outside the cafe demanded reality. Margaret paused at the edge of the market, turning to Emma with a look that was soft, longing, and uncertain all at once. "Maybe we can do this again," she said quietly. Emma nodded, her throat tight, knowing she wanted the same, yet unsure how the world would react. As Emma walked away, her heart pounding, she glanced back and saw Margaret watching her, her eyes full of unspoken words and unshed emotions. Emma felt a flutter of hope, a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. Something had shifted between them, something delicate, thrilling, and dangerous in its quiet intensity. She realized that their story, the story she thought had ended long ago, was far from over. The encounter left her thinking, imagining, dreaming. She replayed each word, each glance, each fleeting touch in her mind, trying to make sense of the emotions they stirred. Emma knew one thing for certain. Life had placed them back together at the most unexpected time, and neither of them could ignore it. There was history here, yes, but also possibility. There was pain, yes, but also the chance for connection, for understanding, for a kind of love that was quieter, wiser, and perhaps more enduring than anything they had known before. And yet, as she turned the corner and walked toward her apartment, a question lingered in her mind, unspoken but insistent. Had this encounter been coincidence, or was it fate nudging them toward something neither could yet understand? She didn't have the answer, but she knew that the next meeting would tell her more. And somehow she already feared and hoped for it at the same time. Emma couldn't stop thinking about Margaret. Every quiet moment at her apartment was filled with memories of their encounter at the farmer's market, the warmth of her smile, the softness in her voice, the way the world seemed to pause when they were together. She wondered if Margaret felt the same, or if it was just her imagination coloring the memories with longing and hope. The days dragged slowly, her routine suddenly punctuated with flashes of Margaret's presence, and she found herself reaching for her phone, half hoping for a call, half afraid of what it might mean. Then the phone rang, and Emma's heart nearly leaped out of her chest. Margaret's name flashed across the screen, and she answered with a trembling hand. "Hello," she said, her voice betraying her nervous excitement. "Emma," Margaret said softly. "I know it might seem sudden, but would you like to go for a walk tomorrow? Just talk." There was a hesitancy in her tone, an unspoken vulnerability that made Emma's chest tighten. I'd like that," Emma replied, her voice firm despite the flutter in her stomach. The next afternoon, Emma arrived at the park a few minutes early. The leaves were turning gold and red, crunching underfoot as she walked along the winding paths. The crisp air smelled faintly of pine and earth, carrying a calm that contrasted with the storm of emotions inside her. She spotted Margaret, sitting on a bench near a small pond, tossing breadcrumbs to the ducks with careful, slow movements. Her hair glinted with strands of sunlight. Emma felt that same pull in her chest, a combination of longing, nostalgia, and something new she couldn't name. "Hi," Emma said softly, approaching. Margaret looked up, her eyes lighting with a mixture of surprise and pleasure. "Emma," she said, standing as Emma reached her. For a moment, they just stood there. Two people connected by years of history and a spark of emotion neither had expected to feel again. They started walking, their steps in rhythm with each other, the conversation beginning cautiously at first. Margaret asked about Emma's work, her apartment, her weekends. Emma shared small details about her life, and soon laughter began to flow between them, light and natural, erasing some of the distance that had built up over the years. A child ran past them, chasing a balloon, and Margaret laughed in delight, a sound that made Emma's chest tighten with emotion. They wandered along the tree-lined paths, talking about memories, some tender, some bittersweet. Margaret shared stories of family events, quiet moments she had cherished, and regrets she had carried alone. Emma spoke of her own journey, the struggles of moving on after her divorce, the moments of loneliness that still found her late at night. Each word, each glance was laden with meaning. They were no longer mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. They were two people navigating emotions that history had complicated but not destroyed. At one point, Margaret paused, brushing a leaf from Emma's hair with an unexpected tenderness. "I shouldn't feel this way," she murmured, almost to herself. Emma froze, her heart pounding. "I know," she said softly, not moving, letting the moment stretch. "I've tried to forget, I've tried to move on, but can't." For a while, they walked in silence, the sound of leaves crunching beneath their feet the only accompaniment to their racing hearts. Each step felt heavier with meaning, each glance weighted with unspoken desire, confusion, and curiosity. Had shared so much history, yet here, in this moment, the rules of their past seemed to dissolve, leaving only two people who had found each other again when neither expected it. Margaret spoke again, her voice low, almost hesitant. "Emma, I don't want this to be just a memory. I don't want to lose you again." Her eyes searched Emma's face, looking for reassurance, for understanding, for permission to acknowledge the bond that had quietly grown between them. Emma's hands trembled slightly, and she reached out to touch Margaret's arm. "You won't," she said simply, the words carrying more weight than either of them could have anticipated. As they continued walking, the park seemed to shrink around them, leaving them in a world that belonged to themselves. Emma noticed the subtle ways Margaret's eyes lingered on her, The slight brush of her hand as they passed a flower bed, the quiet warmth that radiated from her presence. Margaret noticed Emma's laugh, her thoughtful expressions, the way she tilted her head when listening. Every gesture, every glance was a conversation of its own. A language only they could understand. They sat on a bench near a small fountain, the water sparkling in the afternoon light. Margaret took a deep breath, her hands clasped in her lap. Emma, I know this is complicated. I know it's unusual. But I feel something for you. Something I can't explain. It's not just nostalgia or memory. It's real. Emma felt. Her chest tightened, the air seeming to hum between them. I feel it too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've felt it since we met again at the market. It's confusing and maybe wrong in some ways, but it's real. Sat there for a long moment, letting the words settle, letting the emotions speak for themselves. The tension between them was not explosive. It was quiet, tender, a slow-burning connection that neither could deny. Margaret reached out, taking Emma's hand in hers. It was a simple gesture, but it carried decades of emotion, years of missed opportunities, and the hope of something new, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. Painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, they stood and continued walking. Every step seemed to bring them closer, not just physically, but emotionally. The world around them, the joggers, the children, the dogs chasing balls faded into the background. All that mattered was the quiet intensity of the moment, the fragile, beautiful connection between them. Then, just as they approached the park entrance, a voice called out, sharp and familiar. Mom, Emma. They froze. Margaret's son, Emma's ex-husband, was standing there, looking at them with wide eyes, a mixture of surprise and confusion on his face. The timing was impossible, cruel in its suddenness. Margaret and Emma exchanged a glance, both understanding that their careful, private world had been disrupted. That the delicate thread connecting them now faced a challenge neither had anticipated. Emma felt a rush of emotions, fear, guilt, longing, and something she couldn't quite name. Margaret's grip on her hand tightened briefly, as if seeking reassurance, and Emma squeezed back. They both knew that whatever happened next would define everything that had begun between them. It was no longer just a quiet, forbidden connection. Now it was real, exposed, and vulnerable to the outside world. Her ex-husband took a hesitant step forward, his eyes shifting between Emma and his mother. I didn't expect to see you two together, he said carefully, uncertain. Swallowed hard, her mind racing. Margaret's eyes held a question she didn't need words to answer. Could they navigate this new tension without losing the fragile bond they had just begun to rebuild? Margaret exhaled slowly, her composure returning, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. She gave Emma's hand a gentle squeeze, a silent promise that whatever happened, they would face it together. Emma met her gaze, her own emotions raw and unguarded. In that instant, they both knew the path ahead would be complicated, challenging, and full of uncertainty, but it was theirs to walk. The three of them stood there for a moment, the sun casting long shadows across the park, and Emma realized how much she had missed this connection. How much she had longed for someone who truly understood her. The unexpected reunion with Margaret had awakened feelings she thought she had buried. And now, with the world watching, she felt both exposed and exhilarated. Margaret finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. We should talk, she said, addressing her son without taking her hand from Emma's. There's a lot you don't understand. I want to be honest with everyone. Emma nodded, her heart racing, ready for the conversation that would come, ready to face the consequences of the emotions they had allowed to resurface. She knew that the journey ahead would not be simple. There would be questions, judgments, and difficult choices. But for the first time in a long time, she felt alive, connected, and hopeful. As they walked slowly toward the park exit, the tension of the moment lingered, but so did the promise of possibility. Margaret and Emma moved side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, each gesture a quiet reaffirmation of the bond they had rekindled. They didn't know what the future held, but for now, they had each other. And that was enough to ignite hope in their hearts. Emma realized that life had a way of bringing people together at unexpected times, of opening doors when you least expect it. The farmer's market had been the first spark. The park the stage for a slow-burning revelation, and now, facing the world together. She understood that some connections were too strong to ignore. Some emotions, no matter how complicated or unconventional, demanded recognition, and though the road ahead was uncertain, Emma knew one thing. The encounter at the farmer's market and the walks through the park had changed everything. It had awakened something deep, something real, something neither she nor Margaret could deny. And as they stepped out into the fading light, she felt the thrill of new beginnings. The quiet promise of love rediscovered and the courage to face whatever challenges awaited them next. The world beyond the park would bring questions, judgments, and challenges, but Emma felt ready. Ready to explore the emotions that had long lain dormant.